Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are opening up a topic that is, well, it's gilded in mystery, absolutely crucial to understanding some core biblical themes, and has captivated historians and believers alike for millennia. We're talking about the land of Ophir.
Mhm.
That name, even today, it just conjures images of vast, rare wealth, particularly gold, so pure it became the ancient world's undisputed standard of excellence.
It really did. Ophir is one of those legendary names in scripture that, it functions on multiple levels.
Right.
It's certainly a geographical location, a source of goods, but when we trace it through the Bible, it quickly becomes something more. It becomes a benchmark for worth itself.
I see. So not just a place, but an idea.
Exactly. It appears in the high drama of Kings, setting the stage for Solomon's glory, and then it resonates in the quiet, reflective wisdom literature of Job. The very name is a synonym for the pinnacle of earthly value.
So for this deep dive, we've taken an intensive look into the sources surrounding Ophir. And to be clear, our mission is not to settle the debate about its exact location.
Which is a good thing, because people have been trying and failing to do that for a very long time.
Right. Arabia, Africa, India, the list goes on. But honestly, we're not trying to put a definitive pin on that map. Our focus is deeper than mere cartography. Our mission today is to move entirely beyond the geographical uncertainty and really understand Ophir's function in the biblical narrative as a profound theological signpost.
That's the key. This is a serious, reflective conversation for thoughtful believers seeking to understand the deeper purpose behind these seemingly historical details. Our sources confirm that Ophir was synonymous with the rarest, most excellent gold, the gold standard of its time. We see this powerful imagery deployed in Job, where true wisdom is explicitly declared to be beyond the buying power of the gold of Ophir. And in Psalm 45, it's used to describe the unmatched splendor of royal attire.
That is the compelling paradox, isn't it? This place is globally famous, it sets the benchmark for quality, yet it remains just beyond our reliable maps. It's historically significant, profoundly influential in the ancient economy, but geographically unknown. It almost feels, well, it feels intentionally vague.
And that mixture of clarity and mystery, I think you're right. It's not a flaw in the text. It's intentional. The Bible is providing a witness to God's activity, a theological history. It's not a GPS coordinate for future explorers. It teaches us a crucial principle of interpretation, which is this. We must receive what is clearly plain, which is that this wealth existed and it was directed toward God's purpose in Jerusalem, and then hold the rest of the information with humble patience. The details we need for faith and life are provided. The details we only want for curiosity are often withheld.
So if the location is secondary, then the true story isn't about the raw accumulation of gold or even the trade routes themselves.
No, it's about the sovereign hand that controls both the gold and the routes. Precisely. The core message is always larger than maritime logistics or wealth management. It tells us how the Lord orchestrates everything, how he raises up and directs human rulers like Solomon, how he opens trade doors and closes others, and how ultimately he marshals the resources of far-off peoples toward his specific redemptive purposes.
It really reinforces that foundational truth from the Psalms.
It does. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it. The wealth of the nations ultimately serves his final kingdom.
That reframes the entire narrative. It changes the story from an archaeological quest into a study of divine providence. Okay, let's unpack this powerful mystery of Ophir and what it truly signifies, starting right at the very beginning of the biblical record. We'll begin with a historical and cultural background, and the sources tell us we have to go all the way back to Genesis 10. Where does Ophir first appear, and what does this context in the Table of Nations immediately reveal about its place in the world?
The initial appearance gives us really deep roots. Ophir is named as a person in the Table of Nations, which is that foundational genealogical record tracing the descendants of Noah after the flood.
Right.
He's listed as one of the sons of Joktan, placing him firmly in the large family line of Shem. And this is critical because it roots the people associated with Ophir within the foundational global distribution of humanity as Scripture understands it.
So the Ophirites weren't just some random trading partners.
Not at all. They were part of the tapestry of nations that God established from the beginning.
The Table of Nations is often, people see it as just a long list of obscure names, but it's actually a profound geographical and theological tool, isn't it?
It is. It's a map of origins. When it describes Joktan's descendants, the location is vaguely traced, but importantly placed, from Mesha towards Safar in the eastern hill country.
Which is still pretty vague for us today.
It is. And while those specific landmarks are debated, the overall trajectory points toward the land southeast of Israel, so the Arabian Peninsula and possibly further into the Indian Ocean sphere. And the fact that the chronicler repeats this exact lineage in First Chronicles reinforces its historical and genealogical reality within the Semitic peoples, even with the absence of precise coordinates.
But the primary theological takeaway from this placement, it isn't about figuring out ancient borders. It's about God's ordering of humanity, right?
That's the entire purpose of the genealogy. These detailed records teach us that God orders families, he fixes their seasons, their periods of strength and influence, and he sets their places, determining where they will live and where they will prosper.
And there's a reason for all that ordering.
There is. Acts 17 gives the answer, so that they might ultimately seek him. The mere existence of a rich, influential power like Ophir, far away from Jerusalem, testifies to God's sovereign hand over the movement and prosperity of all peoples on the earth. Their existence was for his purpose.
So, moving past the genealogy, the culture associated with Ophir was really defined by the sea. This wasn't just a trek through the desert with camels. The source material focuses heavily on a massive, complex maritime economy.
It was profoundly challenging and high risk. The distance alone required sophisticated organization. To establish this crucial link between Jerusalem and Ophir, King Solomon built his shipyard at Ezion-Geber. And the text is specific, near Elath in Edom on the shore of the Red Sea. That location was strategically perfect, positioning the operation for long-distance voyages down the Red Sea and, potentially across vast stretches of open ocean.
And the success of this whole venture depended entirely on expertise.
Yeah.
They didn't possess themselves. They needed international help.
Absolutely. Solomon was wise enough to know his limits. Hiram of Tyre, whose kingdom was the undisputed maritime power of the age, he supplied sailors who knew the sea.
And the source stresses this point.
It does, because it highlights the staggering investment required. These were multi-year voyages, often lasting 3 years round trip, navigating dangerous coastlines, monsoons, unfamiliar ports. This demanded advanced nautical skill, meticulous planning, high capital investment, and tremendous personal risk for the sailors.
This wasn't a simple transaction then.
Not even close. It was a state-sponsored international venture of immense complexity.
We tend to focus solely on the gold, because that's the headline. But the trade brought back much more than just precious metal. And in some ways, the other items are the most instructive.
They are. They reveal the full scope of the economy. Ophir was tied to seaborne trade, moving gold, yes, but also rare lumber, specifically called almugs, or almug wood, and precious stones.
So it wasn't just a single luxury commodity.
No, this exchange linked Israel to a complex international supply chain, demonstrating Israel's influence during Solomon's peak and showing the diverse resources that God was funneling toward Jerusalem.
It's interesting how quickly, as you mentioned earlier, Ophir stops being just a place name and starts being a standard of quality. It enters Israel's heart language.
It becomes an idiomatic expression for the ultimate measure. Once an item is called of Ophir, there is no higher standard of excellence. You can't go any higher.
You see this so powerfully in the wisdom literature.
Yes. Job, pondering the sheer incomprehensibility of true godly wisdom, states that it is beyond any material measure. He proclaims it cannot be bought with the gold of Ophir.
Yeah.
If an ancient listener wanted to picture the most valuable thing on earth, the richest, most refined material imaginable, they named Ophir's gold. And Job places wisdom above even that ultimate material standard.
And Psalm 45 uses it to create a stunning, unforgettable image of majesty.
Indeed. It pictures royal beauty, specifically the queen, adorned with the finest materials. She stands dressed in gold of Ophir. It's designed to elevate the scene above the mundane, suggesting that everything about the king's court, where God has placed his blessing and favor, should be of incomparable, pristine splendor.
It's imagery meant to inspire awe.
Absolutely.
But then Isaiah takes that exact same measure of purity and transforms it into a terrifying prophetic instrument describing judgment.
That's where the power of the metaphor truly hits home. Isaiah chapter 13 is describing the severity and the finality of God's coming judgment against Babylon. He states, "I will make people more rare than fine gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir."
That is a chilling image.
It is. Think about the implications. Ophir's gold is already incredibly rare and pure, but the survivors of God's wrath will be rarer still. It's a sobering theological reminder that only God decides the rise and fall of peoples, and when he judges, even the standard of rarest wealth cannot buy safety or survival.
What's fascinating here is how quickly a geographic location, a distant trade hub, transforms into a spiritual standard, a theological metaphor for what is most truly valuable, whether that's wisdom, royal splendor, or the rarity of surviving divine judgment. It's an intellectual shift that grounds the abstract in very concrete imagery. So we've established Ophir's background and its place as the ultimate standard. Now let's transition into the biblical narrative, which historically focuses intensely on the high point of Israel's power, the reign of King Solomon.
Yes, the historical books of Kings and Chronicles, they bring Ophir out of the realm of genealogy and into sharp political and economic reality. When Solomon takes the throne, he establishes the necessary infrastructure, building his fleet at that critical port of Ezion-Geber.
This was a deliberate, massive undertaking.
It was, and it was intended to demonstrate God's promise of peace and wealth through the wisest king.
I think we sometimes gloss over the scale of this operation. It was a serious, organized naval enterprise, not just a couple of merchant vessels setting out.
No, it was international statecraft. As we mentioned, Hiram of Tyre provided the expertise. They were partners in what amounted to the most expensive trade route of the ancient world at that time. And the result of these joint expeditions was, frankly, staggering. The sources record that the ships sailed to Ophir and returned with a colossal haul. 420 talents of gold.
We often hear 420 talents without really grasping the reality of that. Can you give us a tangible sense of what that quantity means?
It's crucial to contextualize it because the number is almost abstract to us. An ancient talent varied, but based on common standards used in the Levant, 420 talents of gold would conservatively represent anywhere from 15 to 20 tons of pure metal.
15 to 20 tons.
Tons. Imagine the logistics of securing, transporting, and storing that. Not just the wealth, but the sheer, breathtaking weight of God's blessing and provision.
It's hard to even picture.
And this single haul, which was repeated over Solomon's reign, it was a fundamental economic backbone for the building of the temple and the unprecedented expansion of the kingdom of Israel. It confirmed to the world that God was indeed giving Solomon the wealth he had not even asked for.
And the sources emphasize that this wasn't just hoarded away for luxury. The gold and the secondary goods, they were instrumental in serving the Lord's purposes.
Absolutely crucial. The wealth was sanctified. The narrative makes a point of noting that from Ophir also came that rare almug wood and precious stones. And these materials were transformed into specific items, supports for the temple and palace, of course,
Right.
but also into harps and lyres for the singers.
That's a fascinating detail.
It is. It wasn't just structural. The rarest wood on earth was used specifically to craft the instruments of worship, to make the praise of God visible and audible.
So the purpose of all this imported wealth was to make the worship of the one true God spectacularly glorious and prominent before the entire known world.
That's the precise theological function of the Ophir trade in this period. It was a tangible outpouring of material means supplied by God to honor him. Solomon's reign, supported by this abundance, was meant to be a physical demonstration of God's blessing, peace, and abundance before the surrounding nations. The gold wasn't the end, it was the means to the end of visible national praise.
Now, if Solomon's success is the high point, the narrative provides a powerful and, well, a necessary contrast. The failure of King Jehoshaphat centuries later.
This contrast is vital for understanding sovereignty. Jehoshaphat, who is generally a godly king, he attempted to replicate Solomon's maritime glory. He built ships of Tarshish to sail to Ophir for gold, trying to revive that ancient glorious trade.
But it didn't work out?
Not at all. The sources record a definitive and devastating failure. They never set sail. They were wrecked at Ezion-Geber.
So they didn't even leave the harbor?
Not even a chance. They were destroyed right where they were built.
And the sources clearly tie this shipwreck not to poor construction or bad weather, but to a judgment directly related to his ethical choices.
That's the implicit lesson. Jehoshaphat had entered into an unwise alliance with Ahaziah, the wicked king of Israel, a choice clearly against God's law and counsel. A prophet specifically condemned this partnership.
So the ships were the consequence?
Yes. The lesson is profound and sharp. The God who brought Solomon's ships home full as an act of blessing can also dash the fleet of a godly king as an act of discipline when that king chooses ungodly partnerships. The riches of Ophir, the expertise of man, the planning of a king, none of it matters if it runs contrary to God's sovereign counsel.
It seems like Ophir's function endures even after the historical voyages stop. It remains an active symbol in the poetry and prophecy of Israel.
It solidifies its status as a permanent spiritual symbol. Job uses it repeatedly to insist that true wisdom comes from God, a commodity that, cannot be sourced from the market or the mine. It becomes the absolute measure against which the highest spiritual values are judged, and they always fall short.
And Isaiah picks up that thread, transforming the trade route into a glorious eschatological promise.
Yes. Isaiah chapter 60 promises a future where the wealth of the nations, explicitly mentioning Sheba's gold and incense, connecting back directly to that southern and eastern trade sphere, will stream to the restored Zion to proclaim the praise of the Lord.
That's a huge transition.
It's a crucial one. A trade name transforms into a theological pointer toward God's future, redemptive purpose for all the earth. The means of ancient wealth become the instruments of future worship.
And speaking of the future, while the name Ophir isn't used in the New Testament, the themes it represents, wealth, value, stewardship, and future glory, they echo loudly through Jesus and the apostles.
The echo is unmistakable. Jesus directly challenges the mindset represented by the quest for Ophir. He warns against storing treasures on earth where they are vulnerable to decay and, more dangerously, where they corrode the heart. He urges his disciples to store treasure in heaven.
He completely shifts the standard of value.
He does, from material accumulation on earth to eternal security in the kingdom.
And Peter gives us a New Testament standard that surpasses even the purified gold of Ophir.
Peter takes the ultimate refinement process, fire, and he applies it to faith. He states that tested faith is of greater worth than gold, even though gold itself is refined by fire.
Wow.
He's saying that the spiritual state of a believer, purified by suffering and trial, has an intrinsic value that is vastly superior to the most precious material substance known to man. It's an absolute revaluation of the cosmos.
And the entire biblical narrative, which started with sailors and a port, is concluded in John's vision of the New Jerusalem.
Revelation brings this thematic thread to its glorious climax. We see the kings of the earth bringing the glory and honor of the nations, the ultimate symbolic wealth and achievement, into the New Jerusalem. It is the final, total image of all earthly splendor being wholly redeemed, sanctified, and transformed to pure worship under the light of the Lamb.
That is profound. Here's where it gets really interesting. The gold story starts with a port and ends with a city where no ship is needed.
Exactly, because the king himself is present. The flow of wealth is fully realized as a flow of eternal worship. As we move into the theological significance, we see that Ophir serves as much more than just an ancient historical reference. It stands at the crossroads of three major, enduring biblical themes that are vital for our spiritual health today.
And those are?
God's absolute sovereignty, the nature of human stewardship, and the hope of the future kingdom.
Okay, let's start with theme one, God's sovereignty over resources and trade routes. We saw it historically through Solomon and Jehoshaphat, but what is the core, unshakable doctrine here?
The core lesson is the doctrine of absolute ownership. God is not just the patron of trade. He's the ultimate owner of the entire system.
I see.
He asks rhetorically in Psalm 50, "Every beast of the forest is mine, and the cattle on 1,000 hills," and then concludes, "He owns the world and its fullness." This encompasses the mines that produce the gold, the specific forests that yield the almug wood, the ports, the vast oceans. Everything Ophir touched was already inherently his property.
And the contrast between Solomon's triumph and Jehoshaphat's total failure illustrates that sovereignty perfectly, doesn't it? It shows his control in both the giving and the withholding.
It provides a necessary symmetry. Solomon's ships returning full was a demonstrable act of God's faithfulness to his covenant promises. He had promised rest and wisdom, and he provided the spectacular means to build the temple.
And Jehoshaphat.
Conversely, Jehoshaphat's ships being broken right at the harbor was equally an act of sovereignty, a refusal to bless a partnership that crossed moral and theological boundaries. The prosperity of Ophir did not protect the kingdom, only faithfulness did.
Right.
Sovereignty is always evident, whether in plenty or in failure. It's never about human luck or flawless planning.
It sounds like Ophir's gold was a constant test for the kings of Israel. Who do you believe owns this?
It was. And that leads directly into theme 2, the warning and the invitation regarding stewardship.
Okay, let's start with the warning. What does Ophir teach us about the inherent danger of material wealth?
The warning is clear, sharp, and timeless. Material treasure cannot buy what truly matters. Job 28 stands as the ancient inscription on the vault door, reminding us that wealth cannot purchase righteousness, eternal wisdom, or life.
And Jesus takes that warning to another level.
He magnifies it exponentially, stating the impossibility of gaining the whole world, the entirety of Ophir's riches and beyond, while losing one's soul. The warning is against the idolatry of accumulation, allowing the wealth to become a god that demands total devotion.
If wealth is a terrible god, as the analogy suggests, what is the invitation to make it a good servant?
The invitation is rooted in the sanctification of resources. The biblical goal is never to despise wealth and retreat from the world, but to rigorously discipline and direct resources toward God's purposes.
Like the Omug would.
Exactly. When Solomon's wealth, especially the unique materials from Ophir, was funneled into temple instruments and construction, it honored God. The material became sacred when dedicated to worship. This is the model for us. Wealth becomes a good servant when it fuels mission, mercy, and ministry, demonstrating that our ultimate allegiance is to the maker, not the market.
Now let's address theme 3, the mystery itself. Why the vague location? If God wanted us to focus on the message, why even provide geographical names like Mesha and Sephir in the first place? Isn't that just dangling a map in front of an archaeologist?
That's a very honest question, and the answer is rooted in establishing historical reality while preventing spiritual distraction.
What do you mean?
God provides just enough information, the names, the routes, the reality of the trade, to ground the narrative in history. We know the Ophirites existed, we know the gold came to Jerusalem, but the very vagueness of the precise location keeps the reader focused on the divine purpose, the message, instead of perpetually getting lost in cartographic speculation.
So the mystery ensures our attention remains on the movement of God's hand.
Exactly. The primary message is that God sovereignly drew these resources from afar to magnify his name in Jerusalem, and he will fulfill that pattern perfectly in the future by drawing all the nations to honor his son. The mystery simply directs our priorities.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of progressive revelation and eschatology, you suggested that Solomon's glory was a profound shadow. What exactly do we mean when we say Solomon's Ophir-fueled reign foreshadows the future kingdom?
A shadow, or foreshadowing in biblical typology, means a real event in history that perfectly illustrates a much greater future reality. Solomon's unprecedented glory, the peace, the massive accumulation of wealth, the international awe, the Gentile Queen of Sheba bringing tribute, all of it briefly showed the world what the Davidic king's reign should look like.
A perfect preview.
Yes. It foreshadows the future millennial kingdom, the 1,000-year reign when Jesus Christ, the Son of David, will rule perfectly. At that time, Gentile wealth and worship will fully stream to Zion, the nations will know true peace, and the resources of the earth will be used completely for his honor. Solomon showed us a glimpse of redeemed wealth. The Messiah will bring the reality.
So the core conclusion of this section is that Ophir pushes us to look past today's market reports and straight to the maker and the ultimate future of his rule.
That's the mandate. We are given the example of Solomon, Israel's greatest king by earthly standards, who had all the wealth and wisdom, yet still, tragically, lost his spiritual focus and allowed his heart to be turned away.
Right.
The lesson is constant. The gold that built the temple cannot guard the heart of the builder. Only grace and sustained faith in the one who is greater than Solomon can keep us from the corrosion of materialism.
This brings us to the most crucial section for our listener, the thoughtful believer. Section 4, the spiritual lessons and application. If Ophir is meant to be a mirror, what does it reflect back to the contemporary Christian regarding daily life, vocation, and finance?
It confronts us with the most basic questions of discipleship. What do we truly love? How do we work? And whom do we ultimately trust? It forces us to apply Jesus' cutting question, which is lesson 1, the test of the heart and treasure.
That verse, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. It's always challenging, but how does the history of Ophir make it tangible?
Ophir gives that warning material substance. If the modern quest for our version of Ophir's gold, which might be defined as career success, investment returns, or rapid accumulation, is the primary driver of our life, that is where our heart is anchored.
So the application for us
is relentlessly simple and practical. We must examine our priorities. If our financial support for gospel work for our church or for mercy ministries is consistently thin, yet our personal spending on luxury, comfort, or investments is consistently thick, the story of those ships and temple instruments calls us back to self-examination.
It's about more than just money, isn't it? It's about our time and our energy, too.
Absolutely. Our treasure includes our time, our highest focus, our deepest commitments, if our best effort is poured into accumulating temporary security and only the leftovers are offered to God, we have failed the Ophir test.
The early church provides the alternative.
They provide the perfect counterexample. They modeled open-handed stewardship, using resources to meet needs and support the growth of the community and the gospel. The lesson isn't condemnation of wealth. It is the discipline and direction of wealth toward kingdom priorities.
Okay, let's look at lesson 2, the dignity of good work. We often focus on the king or the prophets, but we forget the vast labor required to get the gold to Jerusalem in the first place.
The sources remind us that the gold didn't just appear as dust. The process was immense. Miners had to dig deep. Refiners had to smelt and purify. Sailors had to steer and navigate complex 3-year routes. Craftsmen, like those who worked the almug wood, had to carve harps and lyres.
Right.
Scripture honors skill, care, and immense labor when it is offered in service to God. Think of Bezalel, filled with the Spirit specifically to do fine work in the tabernacle, or the Levites learning their complex musical parts.
So whether we are in finance, construction, education, or homemaking, our daily labor can become a type of sanctified offering.
Exactly. The application is that we must pursue honest gain and find skilled labor in our chosen vocations, knowing that it is the Lord Christ you are serving. Our professional excellence and integrity, our refusal to cut corners or engage in unjust practices, is itself a spiritual act. Our work, offered to Him with diligence, becomes a form of worship. Our 9-to-5 job is not separated from our Sunday faith.
Lesson 3 is one that speaks deeply to modern believers who face economic volatility. Faith in open and closed doors, contrasting Solomon's prosperity with Jehoshaphat's wreck.
This contrast is the ultimate stability check for faith. It teaches us steady trust in all circumstances. When ventures prosper, when the unexpected contract comes through, when we find the right partners like Hiram, we are called to rejoice and ensure that the returns are used for kingdom purposes. That's the Solomon model of utilizing God's blessing.
But when things fail, when the career stalls, when our best-laid financial plans wreck at the harbor, like Jehoshaphat's fleet, how do we respond pastorally?
We must accept the Lord's sovereignty in the no. We accept the loss not as bad luck, but as God's wise counsel, and we wait patiently for His better yes.
That's difficult to do.
It is, but the failure of the ships was a greater blessing for Jehoshaphat than if they had succeeded, given the ungodly alliance. For us, success is never the measure of our faithfulness. Integrity is. We rest on the principle. Better a little with righteousness than much gain with injustice. God judges the quality of the heart and the motivation behind the plan, not just the quantity of the final haul.
Lesson 4 brings us back to the ultimate vision, missions and mercy. How does the Ophir story shape our understanding of our current mission mandate?
The vision of the New Jerusalem, where all nations bring their glory, connects directly to our task today. While the end goal in prophecy is the nations streaming into Zion, in the current age, the church is commanded to be sent outward to every people group on earth.
So the wealth of Ophir, once directed to Jerusalem to establish the temple, now fuels the effort that sends us from Jerusalem to establish the church.
Precisely. The Lord, who once directed the trade winds toward Israel, now commissions His Spirit-empowered people outward with the good news. When we dedicate our resources, our time, talents, and treasure to supporting faithful Bible translation, sending workers across cultures, or engaging in local mercy ministries, we align ourselves with this ancient yet current pattern of drawing resources from afar to proclaim His praise.
And the treasure God is seeking now is different.
The ultimate treasure God seeks, far surpassing gold, is hearts made new through the gospel.
And finally, lesson 5, keeping comparisons honest. We must always return to the eternal value of faith compared to earthly wealth.
Ophir sets the high bar for comparison, and the gospel lifts the standard even higher. Jesus' absolute, uncompromising standard remains. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul?
There's no profit.
No net gain. Faith that is refined by trials and tested by the pressures of life weighs infinitely more than any metal purified by fire. The joy of seeing Christ at His appearing will totally and completely outshine every single earthly jewel we could ever accumulate.
It's the ultimate profound spiritual contradiction. If the gold of Ophir could speak, after being dug, shipped, and refined, it would simply say, "Use me for worship, but do not worship me." As we conclude this deep dive, the Ophirites emerge from Scripture not as mere historical footnotes, but as people of the sea and the mine whose very name became a byword for excellence and whose abundant resources served God's praise. Their homeland remains shrouded in mystery, but their role in the divine drama is perfectly clear.
It is. The Lord demonstrated his ownership by drawing from their distant mines and forests to furnish his temple, to provide material means for national worship, and to place their name in Scripture as an enduring reminder that the earth is his, and he can redirect even the most distant wealth to his holy ends.
Mhm.
The mystery surrounding the precise location of Ophir is simply an invitation to humility and to focus on the things above.
And ultimately, the entire story of Ophir, the riches, the glory,
Yeah.
it all points us beyond the great King Solomon to the Son of David, Jesus Christ, whose kingdom is eternal and flawless.
That is the anchor of our hope. The prophets looked forward to the day when gold and incense would no longer fuel human pride or trade empires, but would frame profound universal praise, and the abundance of the sea would be fully redeemed and turned to the Lord.
Until that day.
Until that day, we are called to handle all our treasure, our skills, and our time with clean hands, to work with diligence and honesty, and to give with radical joy. Grace, received through Christ, is infinitely richer than the rarest gold. The closing passage from Isaiah encapsulates this entire vision of wealth redeemed and worship fulfilled. It gives us our final charge and encouragement. Then you will look and be radiant. Your heart will throb and swell with joy. The wealth on the seas will be brought to you. To you the riches of the nations will come. Herds of camels will cover your land, and all from Sheba will come, bearing gold and incense and proclaiming the praise of the Lord.
That is a staggering promise. It provides deep encouragement that our current efforts in stewardship and missions directing our finite resources and our very lives toward Christ and his gospel, they're not isolated acts.
No, they're not.
They align precisely with God's final, glorious purposes for the world and the future kingdom he is establishing.
And so we rest in the final confidence that the one who refines faith, who holds all the earth's treasures in his hand, will faithfully keep his people until the day we see him face to face. May your heart throb and swell with the joy of Christ's sovereignty, and may your faith, more precious than the gold of Ophir, keep you until the Lord's appearing.